Hello and welcome to this first Developing Experts live lesson. Looking at connections, and what better way to explore that than to look at the connections between the work you do in the classroom and the real world and careers.
Yep.
So I'm Katie Barry and I'll be taking you through this session today, and I'm joined by Mike Linley. Mike, tell us a bit about yourself, please.
Hello, well, I'm a zoologist, but I specialise in herpetology, so I'm a herpetologist. That means literally the study of creeping, crawling things, but what it refers to are reptiles and amphibians. So my speciality are the study of reptiles and amphibians.
Brilliant. So thank you to all the schools that are joining us across the country. Teachers, if you are accessing the live lesson through the DE platform, you can type answers and any questions you have for Mike in the comments box as shown on the screen. And it would be lovely to see which schools are joining us this morning. So teachers, time to practice and give us a hello. There will be activities for you to complete throughout the lesson, so please fill these in on the handout provided to you by your teacher. And it's wonderful to see all of Key Stage 2 at St Anthony's Catholic Primary School joining us this morning. Today we're talking about amphibians. Mike, what is an amphibian?
Well, the first thing about an amphibian, it's a vertebrate. They have backbones, just like we do, but they don't make any body heat, so they're cold-blooded, which is why many of them in the colder climes hibernate in the winter. They just can't cope with the cold temperatures. They find a nice place underground and they sleep for 3 or 4 months until it warms up again. The word amphibian comes from 2 words, amphi and bios, dual lives, 2 lives. Because first of all, they can live usually on land or in water, but many of them actually start off their life in water as a tadpole, and where they've got gills and they breathe just like a fish, and then they change and develop and grow limbs, and then their gills disappear, they develop lungs, and then they can crawl out onto land as a perfect miniature of their adult.
Fantastic. And there are 3 groups or orders of amphibian. Can you tell us a bit about those, please?
Yeah, they're right. The biggest group are the frogs and the toads, the anurans as we call them. The next group are the newts and salamanders, or the eurydiels or chordata, which means they've got tails. And the third group are the apodans, which means no legs, because they're the caecilians. And they are simply look like giant earthworms, but they're amphibian. They've got little tiny eyes that are often covered over because of their burrowing lifestyle. They've got sensitive tentacles around the mouth so they can feel what's in the burrow and feed on worms and things. And some are entirely aquatic, and some live in the soil and grow to well over 60 or 70 centimetres long.
So we've got a challenge question for you all. As a class, can you make an informed guess about how many species of amphibian there are in the world? Your teacher can put your answer in the chat and we'll reveal the correct answer at the end of the session. So it's time for activity number 1. To help you make that informed guess about our challenge question, on your handout, list as many amphibian species that you can think of. You've got 2 minutes to do this. So, how did you get on with that, pupils at Chad Vale Primary School? Thank you so much for all your guesses. Please do keep them coming. So, we're going to look at the different types of amphibian, their features and their habitats. And whilst we're discussing our first amphibian, there is an activity for you to complete on the handout. So you can make notes and label the frog as we go. So, Mike.
Right, well, we have 2 anurans here,
Okay.
frogs and toads. And the first one is a little poison dart frog. Now, before you handle any amphibian, you should always wet your hands first, because as I said before, they're cold-blooded, we're warm-blooded, and when you pick them up, it's a bit of a shock for them. So this is a poison dart frog. Now, its name's a bit of a giveaway. It's black and yellow, first of all, to warn you, don't try and eat me, because I taste terrible. And it's actually called a bumblebee poison dart frog. And the reason they're called poison dart frogs is they produce a toxin, a poison in their skin, which is designed to taste horrible so you don't eat it. But if it gets into your blood system, it will kill you. I'm safe here because this animal was bred in captivity and they lose their toxic nature after several months in captivity, or if they were born in captivity. It seems that their diet in the wild, which includes ants, the chemicals in the ant help produce the toxin in the skin. So this is a bumblebee poison dart frog from Colombia, Venezuela, the northern part of South America.
So from the Amazon rainforest?
The northern part of it.
The northern part.
They like it nice and warm and tropical, and they're active during the day, and they are brightly coloured. Most frogs and toads are active at night, but these little poison dart frogs are so bold, because they're poisonous, they hop around during the day.
He's on the move there.
And the native people simply get their blowpipe darts, rub them on the back of this little tiny frog, and then when they kill a bird or a monkey, it drops dead within seconds, and then they can eat it. So the toxin is really dangerous. There's probably enough in this little frog to kill at least 10 adults.
Wow.
But as I say, now it's no longer poisonous.
Where is the poison located in the poisonous dart frog?
Well, the actual secretion comes out of little holes all over the little frog's back and sides. They're a bit like sweat glands, you know, if you can see yourself sweating and the water coming out of your skin. Well, that's the same thing with a poisoned dart frog. And it's a white, milky substance, so you can see if it's actually making the poison when you're holding it.
And Mike, I'm just going to stand up so I can see him. But can you talk a bit about the features that we can see on this poison dart frog?
Yeah, it's got obviously a little snout with the nostrils. It's got 2 eyes either side of the head, but its eyes are black, and its body at that point is black, so it's very hard to see the eyes, but you can see them bulging upwards. It's got short legs at the front and longer legs at the back because it hops. Frogs tend to leap, toads don't. And at the end of each toe, you can see they're slightly spread out like a fan at the end of the toe. These are little suckers that help it climb up plants like bromeliads and even small trees, because it can live off the ground as well as on the forest floor. Frogs and toads, the anurans, they tend to have a short body. The trunk of the body is quite short. In this case, if you looked at it in cross-section, it would be rounded. If you look at the Suriname toad in cross-section, it would be very flat, because the habitat it lives in at the bottom of the river. But most frogs and toads have a rounded cross-section shaped trunk between the front legs and the hind legs. Oh, you can see on its chin as well. If you look at its chin, you can see its chin doing this. That's acting like a pair of bellows. So it's pumping air in through its nose and into its lungs.
And is that its throat?
That's its throat, yes. Just again, because this is a black frog, it's hard to see, but just behind each eye, roughly in this position, is the eardrum or tympanum. These frogs, the males croak. Nearly all frogs and toads, the males croak. And so the females need to hear them. So the eardrum can be quite big, and they can hear the male calling several kilometres away.
Wow.
And they'll head for the pond where the males are calling from. So the ears can be quite sensitive. There are 1 or 2 species that live around waterfalls where it's so noisy you would never hear a frog croaking because of the gushing water. They don't rely on a call. They don't have eardrums because they're not listening. They use flashy feet. They have bright blue feet, like flags that they signal to the females. Yeah, I'm over here. Bright blue foot like this. And that's how they attract a mate.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've had another question from one of our schools, and this is from All Saints Primary School. What is the difference between a frog and a toad?
Right, there's very little difference. We tend to call animals with smooth, slippery skins, great big hind legs for leaping, and a sort of pointed snout, frogs. Toads, we tend to call the animals which have got a dry, warty skin, a rounded snout, and shorter back legs for hopping or crawling with. But zoologically, there's very little proper difference between a frog and a toad.
And that's why we classify them together in that one
In
group,
one group,
frogs
the
and
anurans,
toads.
yeah.
Fabulous. So what is this animal here?
This is one of my favourites. This animal is called a Suriname toad. Its scientific name is Pippa Pippa.
Pippa Pippa.
Pippa Pippa, it's great. These live in the rivers of the Amazon, all over North and South America. They're entirely aquatic. But having said that, they do breathe air. They don't have gills. They've got a little snout with nostrils, and they come to the air occasionally to take in some air and then go back down to the bottom again. So they have got lungs. I'll just wet my hand. They look like they've been run over. They're very flat. And what they're doing is that they're mimicking the dead leaves on the bottom of the river. They live in very slow-moving, murky, muddy rivers, and it's very, very hard to see them. They sit at the bottom, motionless, for ages and ages at a time, and they sit there with their little hands, like this, pointing forwards, and at the end of each hand, a little toe has got a little star-shaped organ at the end, which is very sensitive. So it sits there in the dark, muddy water, waiting for anything to come swimming by, like a shrimp or a fish, and then when it touches it, it goes, and it stuffs whatever's there into its mouth. You can see it's got a very pointy nose, so when it comes to the surface, only the tip of its nose need to break the surface, so you don't see the rest of it. Short front legs, just for feeding with, and these enormous, great big back flippers, very powerful for swimming. They can swim really, really fast, and they're very hard to catch with your hands. They're very difficult. But the breeding is very strange, because what happens is that when the female's laying the eggs and the male's with her, the eggs fall between the chin of the male and the back of the female, and you get 60 to 80 little creamy white eggs. They stick to the back of the female, and then she'll sit there, and then this spongy material will grow up around those eggs, and then after a while she looks like she's got a bath sponge on her back. But she'll sit there for about 3 months, and the tadpole stage all takes place inside her back. There's no, you never find a tadpole of these. What happens after 3 months? Little lids go boink boink and pop off all over her back. And as the lid comes off, the little tiny frog is sitting there waiting to emerge and swim away, a perfect miniature replica of the parent.
And that's so that the tadpole can be protective and won't...
The most vulnerable part of a frog life cycle are the eggs and the tadpoles. So if you can protect your tadpoles in some way, and frogs and toads exhibit the most amazing parental care, and some of them have their eggs in their throat, some swallow them into the stomach, some have little pockets on the side, some have them on the back. There's every single thing you can think of, they protect those eggs. Normally, a toad this side would lay 2,000 eggs a year.
Wow.
But because she's going to protect them so well until the little frogs, 60 or 80 is all she needs to produce, but they're really well looked after.
So it's time for activity number 3. Use the information that we've just been discussing to help you with this activity. There are 2 images on this activity, and which is a frog and which is a toad? Discuss the similarities and differences with a partner. You've got 2 minutes. So I wonder if the pupils at Foley Park Primary School identified the frog and the toad correctly. And we've got 2 more here to show you. So one is a frog and one is a toad.
Yes, in fact we've got a common frog and a common toad.
And both found in the UK?
Both in the UK, very common. If you've got frogs and toads in your school grounds, then it's going to be one of these, no problem at all. So I'm going to take out the toad first. And this is a good example of what we call a toad. So, first of all, a dry, warty skin. All right, you can hear it. It's dry,
yeah.
It's like sandpaper, isn't it? It's dry, warty skin. It's got a rounded snout, and lovely great big eyes. Now, frogs and toads use these eyes for when they eat. What happens is that they stick out their sticky tongue and grab a woodlouse or a fly or something. It goes into its mouth, and then you'll see them go, and these big bulgy eyes bulge down into the top of the mouth and force the food down their throats.
Wow.
So they eat and blink like that. So they both have big bulgy eyes, but the toad has a rounded snout. They've got short front legs, and they've actually got quite short hind legs as well, because these don't leap. Toads either run or do little hops. So when we compare that with the common frog, which is hiding in here, it's a real leaper, which is why I hold it round its waist. So, common frog, smooth, wet, shiny skin. More of a pointed snout, the same big bulgy eyes for feeding with, short front legs, but a huge pair of long hind legs.
Wow.
For leaping with. And if I put this frog on the table here, it could probably leap nearly a metre.
Yeah.
So they're really good at jumping. And these have got quite webbed toes at the back, because they do jump into ponds and swim, and they use their webbed feet for swimming with. So frog and toad.
So our next type of amphibian that we're going to look at are the salamanders.
Yes, newts and salamanders in the same group together, called the chordates. Chordates means tail, because these have got tails. Frogs and toads, the Onurans, no tail. These have tails. So we've got here a European fire salamander. Once again, I'm going to wet my hands to pick him up. Hiding under the moss, because these are nocturnal animals as a rule. I'm just going to wake him up. And there we have a European fire salamander.
And this isn't a lizard?
No, it's got the same shape.
Yeah.
A long trunk, tail and 4 legs. However, there are big differences, because being an amphibian, it doesn't have scales. Only reptiles have the scales, which protect them on land, which is why you can find lizards and snakes in the desert, but you can't find frogs and salamanders in the desert. They dry out and die very quickly. So that's a big difference between amphibians and reptiles. You can see it's black and yellow. Again, like the poison dart frog, it's warning you, do not try and eat me, because I will make you sick. I taste awful, and you'll foam at the mouth, and you'll be a bit upset for a few days. Won't kill you, but it just tastes horrible. It's very effective putting predators off.
So that's why we should always wash our hands after handling any sort of amphibian or any animal.
Talking from experience, because I didn't wash my hands many years ago when I picked one of these up, and I ate my sandwiches in the forest, and then it was really unpleasant. I'm not going to do it again. So wash your hands after you've touched any animal. So again, it's got a little rounded snout where the nostrils are at the front. Again, bulgy eyes. This is nocturnal. It needs big eyes to see at night. It's got 4 limbs, all about the same size, whereas frogs and toads, smaller ones at the front and much bigger ones at the back in most cases. And then a tail that's nearly as long as the trunk.
And we've had a question from one of our schools, which is, what's the biggest salamander on the world?
Well, the world's biggest salamander is the Chinese giant salamander. The clue is in the name. And it's gets to about 4.5 feet, about 1.5 meters in length.
Wow, so as tall as me.
As tall as you, but it's a bit ugly.
Oh.
So it's flat. It's got a big plate-sized head. It sits in streams. Although it's entirely aquatic, it doesn't have gills. It breathes through its skin, and it feeds on crayfish and fish and frogs. And we know for a fact that they can live for at least 100 years.
Wow.
And for many, many years, we just thought there was one species in China. We've now discovered it's got such a big range. There are actually 2 or 3 species of Chinese giant salamanders now, all endangered.
Oh, wow. And can you talk about what you've got some...
The life cycle.
Yes, please.
Well, most newts, if you go to your pond and looking at night, you'll see newts laying eggs in the weed. Most newts lay eggs, they hatch into larvae, the larvae grow, they have gills to breathe underwater, they lose those gills, they come out onto land, and then they're air breathing. It's got the elongated trunk, it's got the long tail, but behind the head there are 3 pairs of feathery gills, because at the moment it's breathing like a fish, using those gills in the water. So on here, we've got the next stage where it's lost its gills, it's developed lungs, and so now it can leave the water and come out and breathe on land using those lungs. That whole process, from egg to larva to developing into an air-breathing youngster, that's called metamorphosis, and that happens in frogs, toads, newts, salamanders, and even in the Sicilian.
What is the diet of a fire salamander?
Right, well, the main habitat of the European fire salamander are the forests of Europe. It likes broadleaf woodland. So it doesn't like pine forest very much, but oak, beech trees, that sort of thing, where you've got little streams running through it. It spends all of its life either hiding under logs, in burrows, and then emerges each night to look on the forest floor, especially after rain, for slugs and worms and woodlice and things that it feeds on. And the youngsters eat smaller versions of those same things. And of course they need the streams because that's where they're going to lay their offspring eventually. So it likes cool conditions and shady conditions. Forests are shady, there's no direct sun beating down on them because they are amphibians and they do have this skin that's porous, unlike the reptiles, which have scales. So very few animals actually eat a fire salamander because it tastes so horrible, but a few have learned to do that. So first of all, you get the producers. So you get the little things like little shrimps in the streams, which are eating old leaves and things. And then
so the leaves would be the producer because they are
from the tree.
They're getting their food from the sun.
And they provide food to the primary consumers, like the little woodlice or the little
slugs.
They eat those. And then along comes the salamander and eats those. They're the secondary consumer. But the predators of the fire salamander are few and far between. But despite their tasting horrible, there are a few predators that have learnt to do with them. A hedgehog, for instance, will flip the salamander onto its back because most of the pores that produce the poison are on the back of the salamander, not on the tummy. Okay. So it flips onto its back and it tears it open and eats the innards, which aren't poisonous, but
lovely.
It leaves the skin behind. Tasty.
Yes. Well, are there any other predators that eat the salamander?
Certain birds, crows can do the same thing.
Eagles?
Not so much eagles.
Not much eagles.
No, but smaller birds of prey.
Okay.
Maybe a kestrel, an owl at night. Again, but they wouldn't eat the whole thing.
That takes us on to activity number 4. Can you draw a food chain which contains a salamander? What are its prey and predators? You've got 3 minutes to do this. So I wonder how the pupils at Maidensbridge Primary School did with that activity. Moving on to our next animal, Mike, what is this?
This is another salamander, and it's a very special salamander. It's called the axolotl. And these come from Mexico. Just outside Mexico City, there's a big lake called Lake Xochimilco, and it's called the sort of floating gardens because for hundreds of years, many citizens of Mexico have used these lakes in their floating gardens as like allotments. So they have areas of floating vegetation on the lake, and they grow their crops in this vegetation, and the roots sort of hang down to get water from the lake below. Now, for many hundreds of years, these have lived side by side with the axolotls that live in the lake. But in recent times, because of pollution, because someone's introduced fish into the lake, because they used to eat the axolotl, but now they eat the fish. But the fish are predators on the baby axolotls. The numbers of axolotls have absolutely fallen hugely, and they're now an endangered species.
Wow.
The good thing is they're in captivity all over the world, because in about 1860 they were brought to Europe and into Paris for the first time as curiosities. And they breed really well. And you can actually go into many pet shops and buy a pet axolotl because it lives just like a cold water fish.
Okay.
So this is the normal colour variety. This is the brown colour, but you can get white ones and pink ones and different colours now. This is a wild type axolotl, and it's about half grown.
Okay.
They get to about 30 centimetres in total length. But the first thing you'll notice about it is it's got gills, just like the baby fire salamander we looked at before. But the thing about this salamander is that it never loses those gills. It keeps them all of its life, and it uses us to breathe in the lake. It never leaves the lake. Mexico is quite a hot place, and if you were a salamander and you change from a larva like this into an adult and come out onto land, it might be too hot for you to exist. The safest place is in the lake, where there's water all year round, and you can live your life as a giant tadpole. Exactly what it does. It's a giant tadpole, but it can breed in this state. Even though it looks like a tadpole, they become males and females, and they can lay eggs, and more axolotls are bred.
So it never lives on the land at all?
Not at all. Not at all. It's entirely aquatic. The thing about them is that if you were, never do this at home, if you were to cut its leg off, because they do fight sometimes when they're feeding, and they mistake another axolotl's leg for a worm, they'll bite a leg off accidentally. They grow again.
Wow.
They're like a plastic animal. Because it's a larva, then it actually regrows its limbs, it can regrow its gills, it can regrow most of its tail. So you can end up with a little axolotl with no tail, no legs, and only a couple of gills. But it will eventually regrow everything and then continue normally.
Thank you to Ivy Bank Primary School for submitting your questions, and we're going to focus on one of those. Where is the axolotl's main habitat, Mike?
Well, one lake, as I say, outside Mexico, but there are in fact, now we know, there are 5 other lakes around Mexico, each with their own axolotl type salamander living in it. No adults, just if you look in the water, then they just live as these big aquatic larvae all their lives. Those are even rarer now than the ones around Mexico City. But there are captive breeding programs going on to help preserve all the species.
So you've talked a little bit about the threats to the axolotl. So it is critically endangered.
Absolutely.
So that has the same conservation status as a giant panda or an orangutan. So they are very rare.
Very rare in the wild, very common in captivity.
And why are they so rare in the wild?
Simply because of the effect of pollution, introduced fish being eaten by people over the years. You could, 20, 30 years ago, you go to the fish market in Mexico and see them in trays all lined up. They've stopped all that now, and they do breed them in captivity for release back into certain parts of the lake where it's nice clean water and there's no fish.
Why is the axolotl called the Peter Pan of salamanders?
Right, why is it called the Peter Pan of salamanders? Well, if I remember, Peter Pan lived in Never Never Land, where he never grew up. Well, if you regard the lake where these live as being Never Never Land, the axolotls never grew up. They spend their entire lives as larvae, but they get so big they can actually reproduce as larvae. So, in a sense, it is. Peter Pan describes them really well, the child that never grows up.
So that takes us on to activity 5. We know about the threats and the risks that face the axolotl. But what about the solutions? Use your handout to discuss how we can help save the axolotl. And please do type any ideas you have how to protect the axolotl into the chat box. You've got 3 minutes. So thank you so much for the ideas that you have put into the chat about how to save the axolotl. All Saints Primary School have said that they could limit the amount of traffic on the water to keep the water clean for the axolotl. So thank you again for those. And it is really important that we conserve the habitats for these animals so they don't become extinct and they are still able to live in their natural habitat.
I mean, it's all very nice having these as pets in captivity, but they belong in the wild, and that's where they really flourish and do best, in that lake around Mexico.
We asked a challenge question at the beginning of the session. How many amphibian species are there in the world? So Mike, can you reveal the answer?
Well, sort of. This very moment in time, there are 8,587 species of amphibians that we know of in the world now. Ask me tomorrow and that figure could be different, because they're discovering new species all the time, especially of little frogs and toads that live high up in the canopy in Papua New Guinea and Indonesia. New species of frogs and toads are being discovered, so that number is increasing all the time.
Well, thank you for your guesses and well done to the school that got the closest answer. Keep an eye out in the post for a prize that is coming your way. We've come to the end of our session today, but we have provided lots of follow-up activities for you to complete, such as designing and creating a new species of amphibian that you've just discovered. And as always, please share photos and videos with us on social media. We love to see your work. Thank you for joining us today. We've had over 500 schools attend the session, including Coombe Hill Junior School. And thank you for your comments, questions and answers. But thank you also to Mike and to your guests and for telling us about the wonderful world of amphibians. But before we go, we have one more challenge for you. Here are 12 amphibians. And can you classify them into the 3 groups or orders, the frogs and toads, newts and salamanders, and caecilians? Thank you so much again for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful science week. Goodbye.